Welcome back. In this tutorial, I will show you how to use the information provided in the work breakdown structure and use it to create a network diagram. Once we have our work breakdown structure, we can see the major deliverables or summary tasks such as performance requirements, software, hardware, and prototype, as well as the work packages that each of those summary tasks consist of, such as interviewing the users and defining the requirements. It's these work packages that consume the resources, so we'll be using these to build our network diagram and our overall schedule. Although the work breakdown structure is a great tool, it doesn't tell us how these tasks relate to each other. So the next step is to create this network diagram, and I recommend using the yellow sticky approach to do this. The first thing that we need to do is write down all the work packages. Remember that these are the tasks that directly consume resources, and write them all on a yellow sticky note. For our project here, it would be interviewing the users, defining the requirements, designing the logic, designing the database, code B, code A, purchasing hardware, assembling hardware, integrating the software and hardware, and then finally testing. Most people like to start with the final activity first and work their way backwards. So for this project, the final activity would be testing, okay? And before we can start testing, we will need to integrate the software and hardware. And in regard to our software, we will need to assemble it before we can integrate it with hardware. Okay. Assemble our hardware before we integrate it with the software. And before we can assemble the hardware, we need to purchase the hardware. Now, in regard to our software, we have to program code A and B here. And before we can program code A and code B, we need to design the database. Before we can design the database, we will need to design the logic. And before we can purchase the hardware or design the logic, we need to define the requirements. And before we can do this, we need to interview the users. Now at this point, it's important that we move forward and create those dependencies using arrows. For example, first we're going to interview the users. Once this is complete, we can define the requirements. Once we define the requirements, we can design the logic and we can purchase the hardware. Once we've designed the logic, we can design the database. We can program the code A and code B. Once we're done programming code A and code B, we can integrate the software. We have to purchase the hardware before we can assemble it. And all three of these tasks, code A, code B, and assembling the hardware, have to be complete before we integrate the software and hardware. And then finally, we can test. Now we can easily see the relationship and dependencies between the activities as well as the overall flow of the project. And this is something that the work breakdown structure alone does not provide.